Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. This conference that we're going to hold today was organized with the NGOs that have been fighting for several months and years, actually, on a typical agreement which is not in line with the current history nor the history of Europe as a whole. So I'd like to thank the NGOs and all the speakers who are going to take the microphone to discuss this Euratom treaty. This treaty was signed in 1957 with 6 countries, and the content of which back then corresponded to a certain type of history. Now, if you look at the content of the various articles and clauses, that reflects the fact that that source of energy was essential, and people thought that the technology was going to bring peace and well-being to mankind as a whole, and especially to Europeans. So what was funny about that treaty was that there was no time limit, no duration. The coal and steel treaty had a term of duration, while the Euratom was based on a no-term agreement, and 6 countries were the signatories back then. Now there are 27 countries in the European Union, and now 13 countries have rejected atomic energy. And countries like Germany and Sweden and others now wanted to leave this sort of energy source. And so the same situation, it no longer exists in 2021. Still, the treaty has survived this despite all the nuclear accidents. Although back then people could not fathom, even fathom accidents like Chernobyl or Fukushima and others. So that proves to what extent the denial has come. Now, nuclear energy has been developed despite the opinion of the public opinion, and the European Parliament should now take part in the decisions made in light of this treaty. You know that we MEPs cannot make any decisions like CODs, and we cannot at all participate in the funding of connected with this treaty. It's like an area that lies outside Europe, where investments and decisions are made by the member states and not by the European Union. There have to be deals between countries like Austria, where nuclear energy has been banned, and for instance, France, which is becoming the leading country in that respect now that Great Britain has left the Union. And so there is a reliance also on nuclear energy, which is no longer a reliance on the nuclear energy of France, but of Russia. Now, in the UK, in Finland and in France, in Flamanville, we have seen a development of plants, and with the delays, the costs have gone up, and we don't even know if these projects will ever bring to bear, they will ever become operational. So whether it is about the operation and functioning, and we asked this question to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, when the audition, the hearing with the group of the Greens was held, and we had said on that occasion that MEPs wanted to be involved in the decision-making process. And I asked the question, what will happen of Euratom if we cannot take part in this? And she said to me, can you explain to me what the Euratom Treaty is all about? Well, that's what she said to me. So the problem is that if the President of the Commission doesn't even know what the Euratom Treaty is all about, you can just imagine what European citizens will know. They don't know that it has a separate status and that citizens and MEPs cannot take part in the decisions. And that's a major hurdle, a major obstacle. So this is very important. This conference is very important because we needed to tell people about this opaque, anti-democratic, non-transparent status of this treaty, which is endangering the population as a whole, and I'm talking about the global population. Now, their tactics has changed. Now they're trying to penetrate and act against those who are working to counter climate change. They say that nuclear power is carbon neutral. And so the Commission has met a first group of technical experts who were experts in terms of sustainable finance, and they had proposed to exclude nuclear power from the green taxonomy. The Commission wasn't happy at all with this report, expert report, and so they asked the GR6 to go through a new assessment. So it's GRC, and this GRC is very close to Euratom. 25% of its entire activity has to do with nuclear power. So to no one's surprise, they said it's absolutely no more dangerous than renewable energy, and that nuclear power should become part of the energies that are considered carbon-free. But you know that nuclear power players cannot participate in the Paris Agreement, because if we really wanted to reduce the amount of electricity produced around the world, we'd have, if we had to take care of the energy demand globally, we'd have to build nuclear plants by the hundreds. But the problem is that when you build a power plant, it takes 5 to 7 years for them to be completed. So honestly speaking, this no longer has a meaning. So we need a reform, and we badly need a reform. And several speakers today will take the floor to tell us how to get rid of this Euratom Treaty and what kind of reforms are needed to get beyond it. There's a lot of information that needed to be transferred to the general population. And I know that the NGOs will assist us in the process of informing. We needed to take stock of the situation together during this webinar to understand what kind of action we need to start. Again, there will be several NGO representatives that will take the floor. For instance, there will be a lawyer who is a partner of experts in European law and people who we are working with already. And we are going to try to reform the Euratom Treaty. Then there will be a green MEP and or his assistant who is going to take part in the negotiations with the European partners. So this is going to be a conference on the future of Europe. We wanted to place this reform of the Euratom Treaty as the key pillar of the future of Europe. And there's a group of MEPs from different backgrounds that are thinking of the issue. Now, 2 days ago, the Commission that had been invited said that they will not be able to take part in the conference, saying that they are not up to date, they are not actually aware of what kind of reform this was. That was Actually, on the 9th of April 2019, a communication had been sent to us, and the solution that had been found back then was to create yet another group of experts to think of the kind of reform that would be needed. You see, this kind of industry, despite all the risks, is creating misinformation, and this is delaying decision-making, saying that they need yet another group of experts to think of that reform again and again and again. So I'm so happy we're all here together so that we can put pressure on the Commission as well as on the member states. Because if this situation is as it is because the member states are complicit in this. You see that France keeps pushing its nuclear program, which is not performing well at all. And also there will be a second webinar on the Hercule project. And that is absolutely terrible. This is not helping us make any progress. I think that France will look for an agreement with Eastern European countries or Germany concerning coal and fossil fuels. You see, the situation is complicated, and this is why this meeting today is so important. I will now leave the floor to Basile Hasse, who is part of Réaction en chaîne humaine, who asked to take the floor right now. So thank you very much. Thank you. We of Réaction en chaîne humaine and friends of the Artha and also the Austrian, the other representatives of NGOs, together with Michèle Rivasi, have organized this meeting. We're very grateful to Michèle for setting everything up to discuss the future of Europe. Now, the treaty is like a dinosaur that dates back to the late 1950s. We needed to ensure the future of Europe now, and it's no longer time to wait further, and we cannot afford it. The floor will now go to Julie, who is going to start our presentation. Very well, I'll now leave the floor to Julia Bohnert, who is here to represent the Austrian organization.
The Commission is resurrecting the Euratom Treaty as a special law for financing nuclear power. Hinkley Point C is a nuclear new build in Somerset on the southwest coast of England. There are many things that could be said about Hinkley. For instance, we could talk about whether it serves as a nuclear deterrent. But today's focus is on the link between Hinkley and Eurotom. My name is Julia Bohnert. I'm a researcher and activist working with the Platform Against Nuclear Dangers in Salzburg, Austria. Let's take a quick look of nuclear new builds worldwide. The last nuclear new build in the European Union was completed in 2007 in Romania. The last one in the UK in 1995. The average construction time is 10 years. All of the few worldwide new builds are characterized by significant cost overruns and delays. So we should always be aware of the gap between the rhetoric of nuclear industry lobbyists and reality. That's real world evidence on ground. The gap is usually filled with what we call nuclear illusionism, and Günter will talk more about it. What does a reality check on Hinkley look like? Hinkley is being jointly constructed by French state-owned energy group EDF and China's state-owned CGN. They plan to build 2 European pressurized reactors on site. There are only 2 other EPR builds worldwide under construction in Flamanville and in Olkiluoto. The complexity of the EPR design has caused serious difficulties, and they are many years behind schedule. The projected startup has been delayed several times, as at the end of 2021, it should be 2027. EDF simply couldn't pay to build Hinkley. So it negotiated and reached an agreement with the UK government. Here is the 2013 deal. The UK government guaranteed EDF a price of £92.5 for each megawatt hour generated by Hinkley for its first 35 years of operation. The price is index linked and rises each year with inflation. A study of the German energy brain pool shows that this subsidy would amount to 108 billion euros over 35 years. To draw a comparison, UK offshore wind farms come at the low price of £39.65 per megawatt hour. The UK government will also underwrite up to £17 billion of debt on the project, and EDF will be compensated in the case of a political nuclear phase-out. In return, EDF will bear all the construction risks, of course not the risks of nuclear accidents, including any cost overruns. So the deal provides EDF with a huge selective advantage on the market. This is why the European Commission needed to be notified, and this is why Austria lodged an appeal against the distortion of competition. Here is a short timeline. The European Commission approved the British state aid in 2014 as compatible with the internal market. The General Court dismissed an action for annulment by Austria against this decision in 2018. Austria appealed against the ruling, and the European Court of Justice finally dismissed Austria's appeal in 2020. The European Commission justified the admissibility of state aid basically on two grounds: a common interest in promoting the development of nuclear power, which is derived from the Euratom Treaty, and a market failure when it comes to the financing of nuclear power plants. So state involvement is legitimate in such a case. The European Commission only considered the production of nuclear energy as the relevant economic sector under scrutiny. If the relevant economic sector is the whole European market of electricity production, we can't say it's the failure of a market. It's more the end of a technology that can't compete on a free market. The General Court emphasized that the promotion of nuclear energy as an objective of EU law must not be subordinated to other objectives of EU law, such as environmental protection. This position was amended slightly by the ECJ, but the outcome of the ruling remained the same. So the take-home message here is that Eurotom defines its own powerful legal system for the use of nuclear energy. Isn't it exclusive? And from a state aid point of view, the rules of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union apply in the nuclear sector only when Eurotom does not contain any more specific rules. Let me try to sum it up in my own words. Eurotom has existed since 1957. Since then, very little legislation has been enacted to regulate the atomic industry. They can be counted on one hand. This is real-world evidence. Well, you could say Eurotom intends to promote and not to regulate the industry, right? So ever since, Eurotom has also been a powerful financing instrument. What we see in the case of Hinkley is the resurrection of the Euratom Treaty as primary law to justify acceptable state aid measures as defined in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. The Hinkley case is complex and contested. It is as if there is a semi-permeable membrane protecting the internal market, or you could say Eurotom. Some elements were allowed in, while some others were kept out, and the ECJ failed to justify the different treatment of norms. So can we afford nuclear? Can we afford Eurotom that creates a special economic zone for a high-risk industry that can't deliver what it promises? Let us put this nail in perspective. It should make way for faster, cheaper, safer, and more democratic options. Thank you. If you would like to work with us, here is my email. I'm pleased to share that we are about to finalize our work on a Eurotome analysis, which will be sent to you as a follow-up. Thank you. I'll hand the word on to Christine.
Merci, Julia. Merci de l'intervention.
Thank you, Julia. Before leaving the floor to Christine, though, I'd like to leave the floor to Thomas Waitz, a colleague who works in the Greens EFA group, speaking on behalf of Austria. I think it's important for him to state his position, also in the light of what you've just said. So, Thomas, to you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michèle, and thanks for this first report. Obviously, the Euratom Treaty that dates back last century must be abolished, must be revised, must be eliminated. In my opinion, it must be modified and become a treaty to empower renewable energies. As we've already seen on the basis of the projects we are developing at various stages, the nuclear industry, right from the beginning of the debate on climate, has seen new possibilities to impose itself. And the fact that it's climate neutral, obviously, is something that hasn't any basis, because we are very well aware of the fact that, you know, dealing with uranium and the construction of nuclear powers cause emissions, and also refrigeration of the water being used for nuclear plants causes climate issues. So can nuclear power win on renewables? Absolutely not, in my opinion. So why is it that within a binding treaty, which is linked directly to the European treaties, why is it that in this treaty we should guarantee funds? As we've already said, part of this money goes for experimental reactors, ITERs, and another part of it to improve the safety of such reactors. But in reality, we know very well that these investments in safety and security do nothing but, you know, delay the cancellation of this energy source by increasing the risks. So we've got to be aware that these investments in safety simply perpetuate the production of nuclear power. And this is not in our interests, of course, and it's not in the interest of the population in Europe. And then we've already heard about ITER, cold fusion. We still do not know whether this technology is ever going to work. And even if this experimental reactor, which has gone very far beyond already the predefined budget and has been delayed very many times, seems to work, well, we don't know whether it's going to provide us with energy. It's just a research project, and also basic research is important. It's important to invest in basic research, but these amounts of money going to this project for decades have no connection with the contribution this technology might be able to provide us with. So basically, if we really want to abandon fossil fuels and empower renewable energies. As a consequence, I'll try and conclude by thanking Michèle. I'd like to thank Michèle for her great commitment and great work, because she always talks about the risks of nuclear power. And I also like to thank all those representing civil society within this panel, because without you, obviously, it will not be able to impose our opinions. And I also like to thank all those who are participating to this webinar and listening to us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thomas. Well, you know, we Greens always were against nuclear powers, but new generations are somehow being cheated when it comes to climate change. Why is it that it's so important to have people like you, Thomas? Now we leave the floor to Christine Hasse, who represents Réaction, chaîne, humaine, a very dynamic organization in France. To you, Christine. Well, it's important to try and find reliable data on the credit and budgets of Eurotom. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank atomstopp for this data. They have provided us with these pie charts. I'd like you to focus on the part dedicated to France, the yellow slice. You know that during the 70s, we had a strong development of power plants, of nuclear power plants in France, and for each nuclear power plant, huge investments were made, and despite this, you know, there hasn't been any reimbursement of such credits. So these were just presents. The other countries which are not members of the EU asked for funds to finance investment projects for safety and efficiency of nuclear plants. A study by Lawrence demonstrates that these loans have been used to finance the construction of new power plants and certainly not to guarantee a higher level of safety. Romania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine received about 119 million euro between 1977 and 2009. So all in all, 1,124 million euro have been given to these three countries. From 77 to 2012, the EU for atomic energy gave out 90 funds for a total of 3.5 billion euro. So we've got to be aware of the fact that a Euratom loan is a sort of passport without which other financial institutions, such as the Bank for Development and Reconstruction, can intervene. So they cannot provide funds or loans. This pie chart clearly illustrates how Euratom was essentially created for the production of electricity in Europe. And what you see here in light blue represents 4% of credit. 2% is dedicated to waste treatment. Currently, there is no adequate and or mature solution from the industrial viewpoint to solve the problem of radioactive wastes. Now, in the Eurotom budget for research and development up to 2018, we find 2.2 billion euro dedicated to fusion and fission and to direct actions which are not very well defined. But let's go back in history for a moment. In compliance with Article 7 of the Euratom Treaty, the budget for ITER has been eliminated from the multi-year financial plan in 2014. It's been excluded from the budget. And why was that? Well, basically because the budget of ITER was so big, it was so large that it was separated from the Euratom one. And this increase in the budget was dedicated to the construction of ITER. This year in 2021, the EU member states have approved a postponement of another 5.6 billion for ITER. What does this mean? It means that 15 years after the decision of creating ITERs in 2006, costs have been multiplied by 3 and now have reached 20 billion euro.
So we're now talking about a budget in the billions, and here are the funding for research projects. for 2020. What we observe is a big discrepancy in the funding allocations. When you measure the funding assigned to Eurotom and ITER, if you add them up together, you get 8.5 billion euros. Now, for food, agriculture, and rural development and bioeconomy, you only have 6 billion over a 6-year period. As you can see here, Germany adopted like an intermediate position. On the one hand, they decided to leave nuclear power, but on the other hand, they have made a decision to remain connected to Euratom in terms of research, and Günter is going to expand on this. Considering the objective of climate neutrality by 2050, that's an inadequate target, and the nuclear fusion will come too late. And so it is not a surprise that not many people are asking this question these days at the government level. Many people are going forward, allocating big budgets in the billions, and they decided to allocate additional billions to research on nuclear fusion every 6 years, accepting that their decisions are already 6 years late. So this unilateral promotion of nuclear energy by Euratom should not continue as part of the new climate objectives set in Europe. So we need to stop this hemorrhage as soon as possible, and we need to progress towards other and more sustainable models without protecting industries that are languishing. The project that was presented yesterday by the French government cannot make progress, so we needed to stay vigilant, and we need to think of all the possible repercussions that this can involve. This concludes my talk. Thank you for listening so attentively. Thank you very much, Christine. It's very interesting to see how much money was allocated, how much money was given away. And anyway, I'd like to leave the floor now to Roland Desbordes, and I'm very, very happy to give him the floor. He is the former CRIIRAD president, created in 1986. He's going to tell us about the radio protection, and these are facts that were measured by experts and that are covering no conflict of interest. So the floor is yours. Roland, are you there? Roland, can you hear us?
Ça y est. Pourquoi le...
Yes, here I am. Can you hear me? Is my microphone working? Okay, very well.
Ça y est. Et là, il veut plus. Bon, je vais passer les diapos comme ça. Alors, évidemment...
Okay, let me go through my presentation. Now, I am very, very happy to take part in this event on behalf of CRIIRAD. We felt somewhat lonely in France because we are an independent committee on radiation research created 35 years ago to fight against the misinformation provided by French authorities about the Chernobyl accident. Now, when it comes to Euratom, we have already discussed this as well as the various files that Michèle has presented to us. Euratom was a treaty, as it's been, as we've been reminded, signed in 1957. In its initial Article 1, it stated clearly, and I'm trying to see if I can scroll through my slides, apparently unsuccessfully. Okay. So here is Article 1. So this says that the treaty clearly is in favor of nuclear energy. And the Commission and others have all contributed to the development of nuclear energy. Now, Article 2 also lists all the prerogatives that are given to Euratom, Euratom being entrusted to develop research, set the security rules, and favor investment. Now, what we see clearly is that this all was done in order to favor the IAEA in a Europe that back then actually didn't exist. This was one of the initial treaties, and very few countries signed it. Things have changed in the meanwhile. So what we see as Michèle said a short while ago, this is an exception regime when it comes to its relevance to the European Union. The decisions made at Euratom are made by the heads of state, while the European Parliament only has a consultative role. The experts, as defined in Article 31 of the treaty, have a specific role. The experts do not correspond to the usual criteria that experts are asked to meet. Of course, we do know who they are, and we're often in agreement with them, but we do know nothing apart from their names, and yet this should be a very transparent aspect. So they're not asked to report to anyone, and they're not held accountable. And I'll give you an example of what has happened recently from a health perspective. At a higher hierarchical level, there is an actual conflict of interest. On the one hand, there is a willingness to develop nuclear energy at low cost. On the other hand, we have an incredible amount of rules that were set for this hazardous industry with implications for health, and therefore many rules that apply to radioactivity. However, these are different logics. We know well that the European Union is there to protect its population and that it has to factor in the economy and also has a social role. Yet Euratom is only there to develop the nuclear industry and nothing else. But back then, and we're talking about 1957, there were actually several considerations at stake. People believed that atoms would bring peace. We had gone through Nagasaki and Hiroshima only recently back then, and things looked different. But back then, Europe adopted these ideas, while today, we know that they are absolutely false. As Michèle pointed out, peace does not come from the nuclear industry, and it is not compatible with it. But scientifically speaking, these are also unacceptable choices. And we have indeed tried to come to terms with this problem, we at CRIIRAD. These are obsolete choices to us, especially when you talk about a normal situation without even considering abnormal operation of these plants. And then you have other considerations to make, such as the nuclear waste. And Euratom thinks that they can just simply freely leave this waste around. They're talking about liberating, about letting the waste go. And we in France, we're not the only country where this is happening. We at CRIIRAD, however, were the only ones who had not adopted this policy. Well, now things are changing. So there has been a debate, and various acts of legislation have been passed allowing nuclear waste producers in France to recycle such waste and to take them and to just place them outside the storage sites. And we are considering, and we consider that these are highly radioactive waste. And that against the advice of the populations. We see what is going on. We see them bearing these highly radioactive waste, just forgetting them. And the population is now mobilizing against that. You simply have to know about it. We needed to speak about the authorization that was granted and do everything in a more controlled way. But still, these are hazardous, radiological, radiogenic, carcinogenic, hazardous waste. So this is really surreal, incredible. So all the key ideas that people are bringing up about protecting the environment and everything, well, that's all very nice. But this is often overlooked. The nuclear aspect is often overlooked. And then also Euratom took an interest in the standards of radioactivity of tap water, of drinking grade water, because this does not have to do with Euratom, but because there's radioactivity involved, they have managed to get this file under their own control. And so the standards that were accepted for drinking water are Euratom standards, and they are not protective of the health of citizens. Therefore, let's now talk about other situations where you have, for instance, nuclear accidents. And there too, Euratom has taken care of everything, stating the levels of intervention below which nothing is done to protect the populations, and no measures will be taken in those cases below that threshold. So these are incredible measures, if you will. Those that applied for Chernobyl have been, they are now outdated. And so they will no longer apply. Not even Fukushima's rule will apply, and citizens will not be protected unless the dose is much, much higher than the thresholds previously set. So if there are accidents, Euratom has also set rules that are applicable to foodstuffs in every country, because foods can circulate, as we know, from country to country. So here is a slide that I don't want to comment upon, but you see the figures, the readings, the thresholds are much higher than the recommendations that were in force for Chernobyl and Fukushima. 5 to 10 times more radioactivity will be tolerated in foodstuffs because the management of the nuclear accident must be more cost effective, so to speak. The cost must be much lower. And also the indemnification of these accidents deserves a few words. Now, the insurance companies will not cover you for these accidents, and private insurances will not insure you for this risk. So people who own nuclear energy, and especially countries, will have to take care of that financially. This is an abnormal position if you consider all the other hazardous industries that we know of. Now, in this situation, in our opinion, the only possible solution is to do away with Euratom, and the rules needed to be set by our representatives in Europe from now on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roland. I'm sure there will be questions because Atom proposes rules and regulations that aren't acceptable. And now we leave the floor to Niels Henrik Hooge from Denmark, from NOAA, on the possible non-nuclear perspectives of Europe. So let's listen to Mr. Hooge. Hello, I'm Niels Henrik Hooge, and
Parla
on Eurotom and treaty reform. So what is the issue here? 14 EU 27 member states, which is actually the majority, do not have nuclear power plants in operation. In these countries, there is unfortunately very little interest in Eurotom reform or repeal. It's not on their political agenda, and historically, they have not been willing to spend any political capital on this issue. In reforming the EU treaties process, politics, strategy, and tactics matter. So the million-dollar question is, could there be a way to resolve this problem? The Danish example might be typical of what is at stake. In Denmark, there's no nuclear power program. The original program was abandoned in 1985 due to public pressure. No nuclear power plants were ever built. In 2019, all the political parties in the Danish parliament passed a resolution demanding Euratom reform. The parliament expressed its dissatisfaction that Denmark contributes 20 million euros yearly to the Eurotome program's total annual budget, although Denmark herself has no nuclear power. Thus, it wanted to reduce the Eurotome project framework and make it more beneficial to non-nuclear countries. Furthermore, the Parliament wanted to investigate how the European Parliament could obtain influence on issues concerning Eurotome. A minority also wanted to make the Danish government cooperate with EU member states intent on reforming or abolishing Eurotome. However, the Danish media never covered these proceedings, nor was there any interest from Danish renewable industry organizations. The Danish government never really changed its policy towards Eurotome. So based on, among others, the Danish example, one has to ask the question, what could trigger a real change in Denmark's and other non-nuclear EU member states' position on treaty reform in the energy field? What could in fact be a possible way forward? One solution that comes to mind would be to include all energy-related proposals for constitutional reform simultaneously in a revision procedure. The arguments for this proposal seem obvious. EU needs a new overriding vision in the energy field, which only a treaty on renewables, energy efficiency and energy saving can provide. There's also a substantial need for a stable framework for the long-term deployment of renewables. Also, in a negotiation situation, it would make sense to have as many sensible options on the table as possible in pursuing a green European energy transition. In non-nuclear member states, the focus is first and foremost on renewables, energy efficiency and energy saving. However, as of now, there's no guarantee that decommissioned nuclear power plants will be replaced by renewables. Instead, they could in fact be replaced by imports of fossil gas. So far, none of the measures proposed by the European Commission or adopted by the European Council are sufficient to reach the objectives of the Paris Agreement to limit global warming. In 2019, the then 28 member states presented integrated national energy and climate plans for meeting EU's 2030 climate and energy goals on the way to the 2050 net zero objective. Unfortunately, all the plans fall short on ambition and credibility. Even the highest scoring plans achieve only half the potential whereas the member states' average is less than a third because of inadequate targets and insufficient details on the policies and financing needed to move forward. According to the European Court of Auditors, the EU needs to take significant action to generate more electricity from wind and solar power to meet the targets on renewable energies. Since 2014, there's actually been a slowdown of the deployment of renewables. Court of Auditors calls on the Commission to urge member states to support further deployment and points out that the 2030 renewable targets may be difficult to achieve in the absence of binding national targets. To draw a conclusion, the Eurotome Treaty could be replaced by a treaty on renewable energies, energy efficiency and energy saving. An option could be the European Energy Transition Protocol proposed by the Austrian government back in 2016 or something similar. Perhaps it would also make sense to recapitulate the principal argument for any treaty on renewables in this presentation. It would be this: although the costs of renewables are decreasing, neither their own positive externalities nor the negative externalities of the competing energy sources are sufficiently priced in the energy markets, which is detrimental to the growth of renewables. Also, past support of nuclear power is already built into nuclear power's infrastructure. Thank you. And I'll pass the floor to Günter Hermeyer from Bürgerinitiative Umweltschutz Lüchow-Dannenberg.
Merci, Monsieur Hooge. Merci de cette intervention. Maintenant, on va se...
Thank you for your report. And now we should ask ourselves what Germany is going to do. Germany decided to leave nuclear, to close down all nuclear powers by 2022. So what is Germany doing? So we leave now the floor to Mr. Günter Hermeyer with the initiative from Germany. What's there for the nuclear policy in Germany?
Thank you, Michèle. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Günter Hermeyer, and I work with BI Lüchow-Dannenberg and the campaign Don't Nuke the Climate. And I would like to give you a short overview on the situation in Germany concerning nuclear issues. The Fukushima disaster cleared the situation on nuclear in Germany, and Chancellor Merkel found straight words to end the nuclear age in Germany. At that time already, the installed ethics commission mentioned fundamentally risk and eternity burdens which have no ethical legitimation. Terminate the Eurotome Treaty towards a new regulatory framework was also an important point at that time. Within this contract of the German government parties, challenges of the future are mentioned. Main sentence: we do not want any EU subsidies for nuclear power plants. So what are the contributions the German government pays to the Euratom Treaty? As it is not possible to exact total numbers, I would like to give you one example with the Joint Research Center in Karlsruhe. Joint Research Center was founded in 1963 as an institute for transuranium elements. The Karlsruhe Institute of Technology North still represents a cluster of nuclear institutes partly sponsored by nuclear corporations. Under the guise of safety and waste disposal research, KIT North and the GRC are pushing ahead on a grand scale with the development of a so-called new generation of nuclear power plants, founded by the German Federal Minister of Research and Euratom. Despite Germany's decision to phase out nuclear power in 2011, the GRC Karlsruhe employs around 470 people. Now in 2012 was a permission giving for a so-called Building M. And here we can find some exact numbers on the cost of only this part. It's 69.5 million for construction and about 2 million euro per year. Exactly this joint research center was mandated by the EU Commission to find out if nuclear could be a sustainable and fit into the system of green financing, which the European Union is trying to set up for the Green New Deal scenario. In this report, the GRC pursues a strategy of nuclear illusionism. Real-world problems, for instance, nuclear waste, are solved by referring to a hypothetical solution in the future, without knowing the outcome and if the technology will be ever developed, if it will ever work. And as expected, the GRC report is not scientifically independent. German government also missed the chance to push for renegotiating the Euratom Treaty during their presidency in 2020. Because of the situation that some European countries are pushing for nuclear as a solution to climate change, they believe that one could run the risk of a deterioration of the provisions. Here are some more examples of the forked tongue of the German government. Instead of following the contract, Minister Altmaier pushes for nuclear hydrogen together with France. In the city of Gronau, we have the partly German-owned Urenco enrichment facility, which is also doing research on new reactor named uranium battery and next generation nuclear fuels. Also, they again illegally transport nuclear waste to Russia. Not far from Gronau in the city of Lingen, Advanced Nuclear Fuels is producing nuclear fuel for about 10% of nuclear power plant worldwide. Just on Fukushima Day, the Federal Cartel Office cleared a joint venture between Framatome and Rosatom. Looks like the German government wants to keep nuclear technology in the country to the full extent. In contrast to this, Minister of Environment and Nuclear Safety, Svenja Schulze, set up 12 points to complete the nuclear phase out in Germany. Headlines: complete the German nuclear phase out, close nuclear factories, promote final storage, accelerate the expansion of renewable energies, reduce nuclear risks in Europe and strengthen cooperation, enhance nuclear safety worldwide and maintain competence and inform appropriately. So as you can see, the situation between different ministries and even within political parties is totally mixed up, and the nuclear industry takes its chance to promote their technology as a solution to climate change, which we heavily oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Günter, of these explanations. Actually, we realize there's a double discourse. On the one hand, people say they want to phase out nuclear power. On the other hand, they want to find a cleaner nuclear energy that is available. I'm going to leave the floor to Gabi Schweiger, who is part of Atomstopp in Austria. She's going to talk about Euratom, an undemocratic zone within the EU. Gabriel Schweiger, the floor is yours. Gabi. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Now, I hear translation into Italian. Well, no, not Italian. Anyway, my name is Gabi Schweiger, and I'm part of Atomstopp, Austria, and I would like to illustrate a critical aspect that we all share, which is the total lack of democracy when it comes to Eurotome, because the European community of atomic energy, of atom energy, was not, did not arise from the will of the people, but it was started by the nuclear lobbies. And the treaty was written for the benefit of just one source of energy. And so this does not at all correspond to the democratic principles that we all live by. So although the free choice of a source of energy is guaranteed, every state of the European Union has been forced to become part of Euratom and to be subject to its clauses. And so the reasons at the basis of the treaty in 1957 no longer exist today. And there's no expiration date and no provisions on termination are taken, while any treaty should abide by these requirements to be approved by the authorities. The application of democratic principles is based on consensus in the Union Treaty. But if Euratom had really been worded democratically, it would have found a space on the treaty of the functioning of the European Union or other treaties. But that's not the case. Some essential components of this treaty would be in conflict with the general treaties and the antitrust regulations. So this extraordinary privilege helps it to circumvent general law, as we have seen in the Hinkley C case. And the rules of democracy and free market are undermined, and the principle of do not significant harm is also threatened in the same way. The treaty does not regulate civil responsibility and accountability for people operating nuclear power plants, and this void inevitably promotes accountability schemes that are absolutely inconsistent and additionally schemes that are fully voluntary. We find the same, we encounter the same issues with safety standards. Safety standards are really minimum, and the assessment is left for the governments to take care of, which are generally very closely related to the operators of the plants. That is not in line with the European Union principles, and various attempts on the part of Austria and other states to find out the budgets of Eurotome and of its financial statements have miserably failed, and the money flows are different and unclear, and there is no ledger that would make it possible to trace them in a transparent fashion. No regular financial and economic assessments have been taken place, and comparative measurements would have proved long ago that nuclear power is disastrous from a financial perspective. And we, the people, can only appeal to you, to our representatives who were democratically elected to the European Parliament, although you have no decision-making competence when it comes to nuclear power. The framework is granted by the Euratom Treaty, and its goal is to be determined to creating the preconditions for the development of a powerful nuclear industry in Europe. So whether we like it or not, the European Parliament has no say in this. We can also appeal to the European Commission, which is the entity that preserves the treaties, but that has also no say when it comes to nuclear power. The unique status of Eurotome rules out any participation on the part of citizens clearly. well enough. Therefore, nuclear energy in the course of the decades has caused huge problems that absolutely need to be solved, and the time has come to do so. And it's even more important that these tasks be taken care of democratically. And most importantly, we need clear commitments vis-a-vis nuclear energy and its use, which no longer should be defined as a common interest within the EU. We count on the fact that the Conference on the Future of Europe will take the opportunity to get rid of Eurotome and therefore pave the way to accessible renewable energy sources and safe ones. This is what President von der Leyen said. Okay, let's take her word for it. And she said that she is open to treaty change. We count on the European Parliament to be our strong ally and to use all the possibilities within your reach for this purpose. Thank you very much for listening.
Michèle, ton micro. Le micro.
Michèle, please, could you please switch on your microphone? Please unmute yourself. Michèle?
Excusez-moi. Oui, merci pour cette intervention.
Oh, yes, excuse me. Thank you very much for what you said. Well, it is true that you need to count on us, but the problem is that, nuclear power has allies in political parties. And this being a very technical field, there are many MEPs, whether national or European ones, that are in line with their political party's general view. And I see this in France, whether it's the Republicans or even the Socialist Party, or even the Communist Party for that matter, which historically has been closely associated in the development of civil nuclear power. Well, these people are going to all vote in favor of nuclear power development. So we do have a problem with information, and then you have to stay away from the perspective of political parties because you know, they tend to vote alike, and we see that also in Europe. So this is pretty problematic. So we are ready for the Q&A. So if people want to ask questions to the various NGO representatives, please feel free to do so.
Donc, j'ai des questions, moi, sur...
I do see questions on Fukushima with radioactive waters that are probably going to be released into the Pacific Ocean. Well, maybe Roland, you could take that question. There are a few questions in German, but I cannot translate from German, unfortunately.
Vas-y, Roland, tu peux répondre à la question sur les...
Roland, could you please take the question on radioactive waters in Fukushima? Well, actually, a few months ago, we have we've focused specifically on that. The Japanese initially did feel pretty shy when it came to the management of Fukushima radioactive waters, although some of that water has already leaked into the ocean. Now, the water that is pumped directly into the soil in the reactor building and that were anyway in the reactor building, well, the Japanese have made a decision to create tanks of 1,000 cubic meters, then they have built 1,000 approximately by now to store this radioactive water. The Japanese now say we've treated this water. Well, it is true that they have eliminated a few radioactive elements from those waters, but radioactive hydrogen and other ions cannot be eliminated from the waters. And so the question is, what are they going to do with these waters? Because thinking of a new tank every single month, well, there's no more room to build more tanks. The IAEA, and I'm not sure about Euratom, have been pressing them to release these waters in the Pacific Ocean. And the Japanese government had the intention to do so. It was held back because of the Olympics. They were reluctant to do so, but they have understood that they cannot keep building tanks indefinitely, and so now they have come to releasing an official decision that they are going to spill the waters into the ocean in the coming months in small amounts every time. But these spills will make a very big difference in the natural environment. And this is why we have just prepared today a communique about it. And I would like to add that we've also launched a petition around Robin to ask that these waters are not spilled into the Pacific Ocean. The United Nations have asked for a report on this intention that the Japanese government has made manifest so that it is held up until they have looked into it. And it's not just tritium that the water contains, but also other radio elements, because the resins that are used to filter the radio elements cannot screen them all out. So, and there's also strontium in this water and other elements. So you have the link to this petition that has been just published in the chat. When it comes to the taxonomy, what is the definition of taxonomy, you're asking me? Well, you know there's a Green Deal in Europe, so we're talking about a green taxonomy. The Green Deal is meant to develop everything that is necessary and in phase with the climate change measures. The green taxonomy is based on criteria. The first criteria is, does this have an impact on climate change? And then the second criterion is, will this have a long-term effect, or is it going to be harmless in the long term? So the group that had initially to reject the investment in green solutions have requested a new structure to make their decisions. Now, is there a campaign against Euratom going on? Well, you see, this is an initiative we've made. The group of the Greens is in favor of a reform of the Euratom Treaty because it's not in line with everything that has been said in terms of transparency, democracy, and also fair investments. But what is very surprising in this case is how countries that have not opted for nuclear power or that want to phase it out, and we've seen it already, why they don't weigh in importantly in order to redirect the reform of the Euratom Treaty. Now, all the questions that you see in the question and answer box, I don't know if there's anyone from the NGOs who wishes to take those questions.
Yes. Just a remark that was made by somebody who knows Japan very well. These are friends of ours. I mean, the decision has been announced by the Japanese government as for the spilling of Fukushima's waters, but this will not take place immediately. So we still have hope, possibly with the petition Michèle talked about, there will be, you know, some action from citizens, and maybe we will get to something different, to a different solution, so that this will be avoided altogether. At least this is our hope. And I'd like to tell you an anecdote. There are some Japanese MPs who came to our parliament, and I saw they were present, and I took the opportunity to ask them a few questions. There were MPs responsible for different associations and parties, and I said, what's the position of Japanese MPs? Are you against, are you pro the spilling of Fukushima's waters? What's your position as a political party? And all of them, you know, just looked at the ground, and one person only said, well, this is not more dangerous than radon, so I do not know why you shouldn't spill them into the ocean, because the problem in Japan is radon. And, you know, this was the information we had also received about Chernobyl. Radioactivity was natural radioactivity, then there was more dangerous radioactivity, and so on and so forth. And this allows us to understand that the Japanese MPs don't have any freedom of expression. We understood this because they did not speak up. Okay, well, now I'd leave the floor to Dörte Fouquet. Dörte Fouquet, who's a lawyer, she's been working on the Euratom Treaty for a while. And what are the legal perspectives? So to you, the floor. Well, thank you very much for having invited me, first of all. Yes, I learned quite a bit during this first hour, which is obviously extremely positive. Now we're going to mix up languages, as I often do, and I will focus on the real steps and on the ideas to be followed to start reforming the Eurotome so as to get to some possible results. Who should do what and what should be done? I carried out a study on behalf of the Austrian government, the current Austrian government, in fact, with the previous government, but then this was continued with the current government. And I'm still waiting for the publication of such study, a study which is titled The Euratome's Reform. And the Minister, Gressner, and the Minister for Climate and the Environment and Energy want to publish it, but the Minister in Austria wants to do this with an official conference. So I'm still waiting for the publication. But anyway, going back to what everybody else said, and especially Michèle Rivasi, the most important, the most relevant topic is the following. There are two things that need to be eliminated in Euratome's treaty. Well, first of all, the lack of democracy, the democratic deficit, and those articles that in fact promote and recommend nuclear power. And instead, Eurotome should include more liability on the side of participants to such a treaty, and also civil responsibility for possible damage. And there, a lot still needs to be done. It'd be useful to have a chapter on personal and collective liabilities, and this could help everybody, I think, and do so in real terms. And then we also need to add that the European Commission has sent out a communication on the future of EU energy and climate would be included into Euratom's treaty, and this dates back to 2018. This was the first communication. Then a further information that dates back to April 19 that was made. So, and in these texts, in these documents, we find the idea of actually revising Euratom's treaty. So the European Parliament and the Greens should go back to such communications and reread them, because these are documents that already exist and that can be a basis. We can use them. And then I heard somebody say that we have the issue of, eliminating wastes, and this is something that is attributable to Eurotom, and you can't go any other way, as it's happening in France. In France, they're thinking about possible different technologies, alternative technologies, rather than stocking wastes underground. Now, I do not want to dwell on this, because some member states, and so, especially some companies in some member states, in Germany, for instance, found an agreement, but elsewhere the debate is still very open. So what I want to say is that Eurotom does not foresee anything as far as wastes go. The Commission, the European Commission, already developed different directives, which are good directives in this respect, to guarantee safety in the management of nuclear wastes. But the legal basis is always Article 30 of Eurotom, which has to do with the health of workers and blah, blah, blah. So Eurotom does not say a word on wastes. And so this is a problem. We need to try and find a way to actually find a legal basis so that we can change Euratom's articles. I mean, the Parliament struggled a lot and got to the Court of Justice to define a legal basis to actually deal with these issues, but this has never been possible. And so we, in the articles in the Euratom Treaty, waste management is not taken into account. So Euratom won on this. Something else I wanted to say, there's been this large study I participated to. Well, in this study, there was a vast debate concerning the Lisbon Treaty. We talked about Lisbon Treaty. We still talk about the Lisbon Treaty. And we talk about the Lisbon process under the aegidity of Giscard d'Estaing, who chaired this convention. Well, to this extent, I should say that maybe this is a criticism. I should say that civil society, especially in France, I don't know what happened, but didn't do anything, as far as Euratom goes. I mean, we didn't hear the voice of France in this debate about Euratom. And Giscard d'Estaing did everything possible to leave Euratom unchanged. The Austrians on their side instead, or the Germans too, had fought during this debate to go against Euratom. And if I'm not mistaken, the Nice decision many years ago again moved in favor of Euratom. So it'd be very important to know who said what at that time, what topics had been discussed, because many of the topics discussed at that time could be reused for the current debate. And unfortunately, I don't really have time to dwell on the details, but sometimes there are specific topics that should be taken into account, because at that time, for instance, some said that very many of Euratom's articles could be eliminated, for example, because there was already something similar or even better in our European treaty. So there are things that we have to go back to, because some things must be maintained, other articles should be eliminated, and then the European Parliament, I know that during that Lisbon Convention asked to envisage a clause, a specific clause called sunset clause, to define an expiry date, a threshold for the phase-out period. And this, again, is something absolutely necessary at this point in time. Then we can also say something about how we might change or review the treaty. And to this, in Article 48 of the Treaty of the European Union, there are some reform procedures, ordinary revision procedure, again in Article 48, then there are simplified procedures, etc. And despite some of these have been included into the Euratom treaty concerning, for example, the phasing out from the nuclear. The Euratom treaty instead does not include anything like this. So Article 48 of the European Union Treaty has not been included into the Euratom Treaty, and they could have done it. I mean, they didn't do it, and they simply refer to other articles. So basically, the Euratom Treaty cannot be changed within with a simplified procedure, if not by reaching absolute majority. So with the unanimity of votes. And this is something we understand by reading Article 106A of the Euratom Treaty, where they mention Article 48 of the European Treaty without saying anything in more detail. So what can we do to launch a new negotiation to reform this treaty? Well, I think each member state can do something, and the European Commission or the European Parliament even can ask or make a proposal to revise the Euratom Treaty. And these possible proposals will be then subject to subjected to the Council of Europe and to the parliaments of the member states. And this procedure could be interesting, in fact, because we often forget that if there is a simple majority of the member states within the European Council, if you have the majority, a simple majority that agrees on the idea of reviewing some proposals and revising the treaty, well, at this point, the President of the European Council must appoint a person responsible for that, and then organize a debate. And so obviously everybody needs to be listened. All the member states need to be listened. And so the promoters who would be part of this committee would then represent national parliaments and national heads of states. So together with the representatives of the European Parliament and the European Commission, we would also have the inclusion of national politicians. And this convention should discuss possible proposals. And after that, obviously, some of these proposals could be selected and could then become undergo consensus analysis. So all this information would then have to be sent to the conference of the representatives of the different governments of the member states, who in turn would have to work on such recommendations, on such possible solutions, but clearly in the end, all member states must agree on the conclusions. So this could be a possibility. Then there are also other possible mechanisms. I simply tried to provide you with a general overview of the classic procedure. A while ago, we heard, if I'm not mistaken, Niels, maybe Niels was the one who said that the majority of member states are non-nuclear states after the UK left the European Union. So there's a majority of states that are not pro-nuclear. I know that Poland, you know, hasn't decided yet, but Poland has been, you know, behaving like this in the last 15 years. They never know where to stand. They always have this nuclear project in their drawers, and sometimes they take it out, sometimes they don't. They obviously want support from France for their domestic policy. But I'm positive on the idea that we might still have a simple majority to start this process I was referring to. So this is basically what I wanted to say, and not to dwell too long on this, I'd simply add the following. Something has changed a lot in Europe, and this something is connected to decisions coming from the European Court of Justice. About Hinkley Point, the nuclear power plant in the UK, and this has clearly demonstrated that Eurotom needs a revision because the Court of Justice would have to recreate a new market outside of the Union. So what did they do? They went back to 1957, forgetting what we went through towards the domestic market for Europe. So these decisions that were taken by the court were provocative because they stated that articles that have to do with the environment and that are part of the European Union Treaty should not be applied to Eurotom because Eurotom is something different, is something totally disconnected from the European Treaty. And the court said, no, this is also true for Eurotom. And this means that basically people see things differently depending on where they stand. And this demonstrates how Eurotom needs a revision because this has an impact on our civil and legal life.
Maybe our Austrian colleagues could kindly put some pressure for this study to be published. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dörte. I would like to say that it's not easy because we have two alternatives. Either we reform the Euratom Treaty so that it is a lot more democratic than it currently is, and we include certain criteria that, as you suggested, could be modified. Or we can say that any energy, whether nuclear or fossil, is part of the European Treaty. There's no reason why nuclear power should have a different status. You're right. It is not admissible that the Euratom Treaty is specifically on nuclear and has a separate status. Why should it be so? I think it has... I mean, the democracy and the, the general functioning of the European process with expert committees that work with the parliament, I think we should really fight so that they integrate the European treaties. I'm sorry, sort of contradicting you, because if we accept the reform, is that we accept this this special status on the part of nuclear power. Now, if I may be allowed to say something else, because what you're saying is very important, Michèle. There are two arguments that come into play that are very pragmatic. I don't have time to deal with that discussion now fully, but when it comes to Euratom, you can probably just dump half of the clauses in the treaty. There are a few things that will require some time to transition to the general treaty. And for this, I mean, when it comes to the majorities, you could include a deadline clause or a sunset clause. And that would leave you enough time to take care of all the details of what needs to be transferred elsewhere and what we needed to negotiate, because every country, including France, needs to be in agreement with what we need to do. We need to be realistic. And unfortunately, France, because of nuclear power, is very keen on keeping Euratom going, and also they have an issue with the waste, with the nuclear waste. So it's an opportunity to stay open if France accepts that Euratom is limited, is set limit, and if most things can be given a deadline, well, then we can get to some solution. Now, think of what we did for the steel agreement and treaty. There have been long stretches of time during which we had support programs for the coal areas, the Ruhr, and I think that is a good lesson for us now. If we could have a nuclear third-party liability integrated, that would be much better than the Paris Convention and the Brussels Protocol. If we could add something to this treaty, I think, well, probably people know that this is going to cost them a lot, but they might be even tempted to say yes to closing Euratom within 10 years to phase it out. And something that I no longer say is we should replace the Euratom Treaty with a renewable energy treaty. I used to say so 20 years ago, no longer now. If we hadn't had the favorable schemes for Euratom and fossil fuels for many years now, the renewables would have been the source of energy. So it's already mainstream. So why creating a treaty if the renewables already are the sources that are making most progress in the energy market? There's no reason for that. And that concludes my intervention. Now, before we go back to the QA, I'd like to leave the floor to Christian Becker, who is Daniel Freund's assistant, a Green MEP, who is in charge of the negotiations on the European Parliament resolution on the future of Europe, the convention, the conference on the future of Europe. Why have there been negotiations about the future of Euratom? Thank you for this invitation. I'd like to resume where Dörte just left off.
How can this conference on the future of Europe help to change the Euratom Treaty? You have outlined there is a procedure where at least no unanimity, but only a majority is needed to start the procedure. if treaty change is at all topic in this conference on the future of Europe, was one of the major issues of fight, of contention in the start. And I think at least it's not ruled out. The conference itself cannot start the procedures, but it can give momentum. It's therefore the best chance to create such momentum in quite a number of years since the last time we changed something about the treaties. The joint declaration between the three main EU institutions does not exclude treaty change as a topic for recommendations. The joint declaration speaks a bit about where more EU action could help citizens' demands. So probably democratizing Euratom might be easier than to just abolish the treaty. How's the process of this conference looking like? Basically, the work has just started in the governing body, the executive board of this conference, where Daniel is the Green representative. The 19th of April, so already next week, is the online platform supposed to start. That is where all of us here can input ideas, and not only input own ideas, but also can endorse ideas of others and can comment negatively, positively, neutrally on existing ideas in the platform. On 9th of May, there's supposed to be a launch event that is still a bit pending the internal rules to be decided on Thursday next week, and how the pandemic situation looks for like a physical or hybrid meeting in Strasbourg and online. The French presidency, it's again the French, Macron, they insisted to have political conclusions drawn from this conference in spring 2022, spring next year, just before the French presidential elections. The idea is that hopefully these will be preliminary conclusions, so that like when political aims are set, then like we have more time to decide how to implement that. Who is gonna decide in this conference? The best way to bring in new ideas, to pressure for things that have been too long neglected, like what we are talking here about, is the randomly selected citizen panels, after not at least the example of the Convention Citoyenne pour le Climat that happened in France and gave so much momentum also to the movement on the streets right now. And these, when the rules, how they should look like, are basically established next week, then the random selection can start, and they would start to meet in September, October. Then they are supposed to work with the input gathered from this platform that should start next week. So for all NGOs, for all us Greens, it would be really helpful to gather a momentum and to gather backing for these reform proposals in this platform, so that then this goes to the citizen panels as an important topic. Then working on this input, they would meet and discuss, like we've seen in France, possibly a bit shorter, and make recommendations to a conference plenary. This conference plenary is basically those people from those institutions that, according to EU treaties Article 48, are supposed to change the treaties. So we have the members of the European Parliament, we have members of the national parliaments that would usually ratify any changes. We have representatives of the governments and of the Commission. and then some people from like social partners, perhaps somebody from NGOs, the conference of the Committee of Regions, the Economic Social Committee, and so on as like some observers. And they would then take these recommendations from the citizens and translate that into these political conclusions, possibly into how to change things afterwards. So this could give this momentum that Dörte has talked about when it comes to how to launch such a change, also of treaties, not only the classical EU treaties, but also the Euratom treaty. To gather momentum in this conference plenary, that will be meeting not too often. So I think a key thing will be, again, informal work around that. There will be probably caucuses of the political families uniting the deputies from the national parliaments and the European Parliament, and possibly similar people. There, like, civil society can again try to move people, to make people focus on certain issues, and there will be probably working groups that focus on specific topical domains, so possibly also on energy and climate. Since some things in this process are still negotiated right now this week and only decided hopefully Thursday next week, I will post the link to how to subscribe to Daniel's newsletter so that everybody who wants to know how this progresses can do so, and we can send updates on that. I hope that helps a bit to understand the process and how that can help your aims here.
Merci, Christian. Au moins, tu nous offres une possibilité.
Thanks a lot. At least you are offering us an opportunity to take action and put some pressure so that this Euratom treaty will become part of the agenda of the future of Europe. We don't have much time in our hands. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. I know that Julian, you raised your hand, so you have the floor, Julia.
Okay, thank you. Just to make something straight for the record, because, oh, sorry, I may have turned the translations. Okay, so Mr. Beck and Dörte Fouquet have mentioned reforms to the Euratom Treaty. And I think I can speak on behalf of all the NGOs participating. We demand an uncompromising end of the Euratom Treaty. I totally agree with you, Michèle. And we are fearing what we are seeing, like the Commission issued a communication in 2019 saying that the ordinary legislative procedures should be extended onto Eurotom. And, you know, we are fearing that adding a little democracy to Eurotom, from our point of view, it doesn't suffice at all. So the options we have concerning Eurotom is first the termination of the Euratom Treaty, which would be a unilateral step. It's free for each member state. Then second, we have the dissolution of the Euratom Treaty. And for instance, the relevant provisions could be transferred to the other Euratom, to the other European Union treaties. Or, for instance, we've devised a treaty switch in cooperation with a professor of international law. That was a cooperation between PLAGE and NOAA to make a treaty switch from Eurotom to a treaty for renewables, energy efficiency, and energy savings. So it's a legal draft. I'm pleased to share it with any one of you who wants it. And the third option is a reform of the Euratom Treaty. And I want to stress here that it needs, Dörte talked about some pragmatism, and adding a little democracy to a contract that privileges a high-risk industry. And sorry to say, it's a niche product. Atomic energy is a niche product on the international market and also on the Eurotome market. There is no justification whatsoever in the 21st century to privilege a high-risk niche product and give it as the status of primary law within the European Union. We have to understand the Eurotome Treaty is here as primary law. It has been signed in 1957 alongside with the treaty of the establishing the European Commission Community, European Economic Community. So since then, here is Eurotome. We are in the year 1957. The European Union has evolved. You know, there have been so many reforms. We are thinking of Maastricht, of Amsterdam, of Nice, of Lisbon. So we have here the main two treaties defining European politics, and here we have Eurotome. But what we see constantly is the resurrection of the Eurotome Treaty as primary law to, for instance, to sponsor nuclear research. It has been such a powerful instrument since 1957 for financing the nuclear industry and for keeping it alive. Second, it grants the nuclear industry the status as a primary law. And as Roland has pointed out, the logic of the European Union, which has evolved over time since over 64 years, and the one of the Eurotome Treaty are so, they are contradicting each other. The European Union doesn't go hand in hand with the Eurotome Treaty. We have to understand that. So a reform, if we maintain the status quo of Eurotome as primary law, nowadays in the 21st century, come on, it's such a scandal. Sorry, I'm really getting emotional about it because I can't understand that the nuclear industry enjoys such a privilege, is like is granted a special economic zone. Only the atomic industry, and we have all the European Union. I mean, sorry, there are more relevant industries, and the risks of the nuclear industry are uniquely grave. It's not like any other industry, and renewables outperform nuclear in all aspects. So what are we talking about? What are we talking about? Thank you.
Merci Julia de ton...
Thank you, Julia, because basically you said what many NGOs think. Now I leave the floor to Julia Kluse, who is working for the Commission for the Energy Business, to draw the conclusions of this. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Michèle, and Phil, thank you for having chaired this debate, this chat. I hope the interpreters will be able to follow me. Well, I found what Germany told us very interesting when they talked about the Euratom Treaty. I thought we would have had the possibility one way or another of following the usual procedures to revise the treaty. I thought it was possible to change the Euratom Treaty into something that could allow us to improve safety, for example, and that could also allow us to better clarify how, say, wastes, radioactive waste should be stocked so as to improve the safety of European citizens. And I think all NGOs that are present here today agree on the fact that basically nuclear energy is all in all better than the times of dinosaurs, because dinosaurs are extinct. And if we instead put radioactive wastes underground, in the end, we will never get 3 of them. So what we can find, and certainly Thomas, Eleonora, and Michèle will agree with me, as they often speak with national MPs and European MPs. Well, I think that basically the nuclear business, the nuclear industry, is based on myths more than reality. And when it comes to renewables, you know, people say, you know, solar power is not something you can exploit on a constant basis. And what can we do, you know, with climate change if, say, water resources dwindle because there won't be water for reactors. But you know, also those fears a country might have because we might be left without electricity because the wind is not always there or the sun is not always there, are, you know, silly arguments that can be re-included in our discussion when it comes to energy. Because we should try to reach a high level of resilience, a higher level of safety, much more so than what we might achieve with nuclear power. And this is what we should talk about, really. This is a narrative we should bring about because we absolutely do not want to continue with nuclear power. We must state that renewables are cheaper, that they can guarantee energy also in periods of crisis, and much more so than what a nuclear reactor might do. Because a nuclear reactor needs uranium, you know, and huge quantities of water. In the addition of the Commission on the Industry, Mark Jacobs from Stanford University, a professor from Stanford University, has presented his study. And I must say he was very, very fast in doing so. But basically what he said was that the supply of renewable energies, of clean renewable energies, and this means excluding obviously biomass, is something possible in Europe by 2040. And with this, we could even save money. So I think this is a narrative we should put forth at last to eliminate this issue of nuclear energy. Thank you very much, Jutta. And now I would leave the floor to Nola Evi, who represents the Greens and who was part of the 5-star movements before. Eleonora, to you the floor. Sì, grazie.
I managed to listen just the second half of it because I was in the petition committee, but I assume that the first group of intervention was equally insightful as the second one. The future of the European energy system is for sure one of the many topics that the conference on the future of Europe is going to address, but we really need to keep debating on it. And this is why I think that by discussing if it is possible and how to reform the Euratom through the conference, today's intervention highlighted that the key element of both the debate over the future of European energy system and the one of the conference of the future of Europe is citizen participation. As you probably know, Italy's experience with nuclear energy has started already in the 50s and in the 60s, and it was marked with 2 crucial referendums. In 1986, when 80% of the voters rejected the idea of installing nuclear power plants. And then later in 2011, as the government started pursuing a new nuclear dream in a way that was against what electors has said, almost one Italian out of two Italians voted to end the nuclear development in Italy once and for all. Of course, Italy is yet to become a nuclear-free country. Aside from research and medical use, we are still facing the huge repercussion of our nuclear past with the commissioning and treatment of waste. And we are also part of the ITER. And just lately, this is very bad, the new Minister of the Ecological Transition expressed hope in fusion energy as a long-term sustainable solution, despite the complete lack of results achieved so far. This is simply unacceptable and crazy. But not only, our neighbors, especially France, are taking decisions that inevitably impact Italians, who sometimes cannot even voice these concerns, as they should be able to, according to the ESPO Convention. So the experience in Italy shows how important it is to consult people when it comes to the future of energy, and especially nuclear energy. This should be done at European scale, for example, as Belgium is now doing for the prolongation of 2 of its power plants. And citizens' participation is also what the Conference of the Future of Europe needs in order to bring about real change through a solid feedback and reporting mechanism where the Parliament also plays a role. It is ultimately an issue of trust. I see in this way, for citizens to trust the European Union and for the EU to trust its citizens. Thank you.
Merci, Eleonore.
Thank you very much. Eleonora? Well, with all the NGOs present today and with all the different speakers who took the floor, I'm wondering, how can we go forth? I mean, we have to talk about the future of Europe, we know. So yes, the platform is very important. NGOs can be very active, and citizens should use this platform to be able to express themselves and say, for example, that Eurotome does not comply with, the principles of Europe on, democratic rulings in line with Paris agreements. This is a huge opportunity. And then there is a second point. And Niels' report made me ponder on this. The European Protocol for Energy Transition that had been proposed by Austria, we should go back to this protocol. We should really study it in detail to be able to propose it to the various member states. I no longer remember when that was proposed. It was 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So it's important to go back to that, to state that there are states that still have not chosen nuclear power and that can exercise pressure on other member states. And then there is another thing. Citizens, and we have the example of France, large cities that have been won over by the green, Marseille, Bordeaux, Lyon, etc. In all these cities, renewables must be developed, because if we don't do that, and we see how the nuclear lobby is acting, if we don't do it, nothing will happen. So we must act ourselves. We must try, for example, to be more compliant with what we have in terms of nuclear powers here in France. And this is going to be extremely costly. And we can't do this if we don't exercise any pressure at international level and also at national level, if we don't talk to the European institutions and if we do not talk to citizens, because this is the only way we can win in this action. Nuclear power is connected more to death than to life. We've seen this with the various catastrophes that have taken place with Fukushima, with Chernobyl. It's something which is not sustainable, and we know that for sure. It's not something we can control as we should. So I really, really hope we can work at national level, at European level with NGOs to be able to overcome the situation and go back to this discussion of the Euratom Treaty. So thank you very much to you all. Thanks to all the participants, and I really hope this struggle will see us as winners. I really hope we will win, but we can win only if we will work united. Thank you.
Merci Michèle, merci à tous.
Merci beaucoup.